stories that I heard, probably again from my father, was their treatment, that they went off to fight a war, and when they came home, that they were treated so very poorly, that they fought for the freedom of other people, but they did not have freedom themselves.
I couldn't understand that the boys could go off and go overseas and fight for the country, fight and die. But when they come back home, they was living the same way they were living, or even worse off, and before they left. That always stayed on my mind. How can a man die for a man, and then he can't live with him? Because there's no better friend than one that will lay down his life for his friend. I don't care what color he is.
Truth remains that every day, memories of World War II, its sights and sounds, its terrors and triumphs, disappear. Segregated African American units served with distinction in Europe and the Pacific during the Second World War. None received the recognition they deserved. In recent years, some, such as the 761st Tank Battalion, the Black Panthers, have managed to garner some attention. Others, though, have remained almost entirely forgotten, despite their excellent combat records and wholehearted sacrifices. Despite enlisting in high numbers, African Americans were subjected to racism in World War II and racial segregation. They were subjected to discrimination and stereotyping that resulted in them being assigned labor-intensive roles rather than active combat roles. They were given fewer supplies and equipment compared to their white counterparts, and many white individuals believed that the black soldiers did not have the capability nor were suited to serve as officers. Further, federal law postulated that white troops and black troops could not fight alongside each other. Executive Order 8802 by Roosevelt did little to help the cause because it was primarily issued to appease the civil rights leaders such as Randolph. It was not until the Battle of the Bulge that Dwight D. Eisenhower desegregated the units, allowing African American soldiers to fight alongside the units of all white soldiers. Approximately 2,500 African American soldiers fought alongside the white soldiers in a bid to repel German troops. Another time when the African Americans defied the biases against them was when Pearl Harbor was attacked. Dory Miller helped his commanding officer to safety by shooting at Japanese warplanes and was later recognized as one of the heroes of World War II. The Tuskegee Airmen also helped break through the racial barriers of the military as they were at the forefront of the fight. In the year 2020, the Department of Defense, DoD, commemorated the 75th anniversary of World War II by recognizing the contributions and sacrifices made by all service members and civilians on the home front. For more than 200 years, African Americans have served courageously in every conflict in the history of the United States. They endured individual and institutional racism while fighting for social equalities and opportunity. During World War II, more than 2.5 million African American men registered for the draft, and African American women volunteered in large numbers. When combined with black women who enlisted into the Women's Army Corps, more than 1 million African Americans served the Army during the war. At home, African Americans proactively fought for their right to work in positions in the defense industry, nonetheless facing discrimination and segregation. As we remember their contributions to World War II, we are reminded of the nation's struggle for equality. Welcome to yet another video segment, amazing viewers. Today, we are bringing you yet another interesting episode, and yes, we're still on the experiences of black soldiers during World War II, as we are still greatly taken aback by the awesome heroic deeds of African Americans during the war, and why it has all gone unacknowledged. Don't forget to support our works by hitting that like button in front of you. Share with families and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening black narrative, and kindly subscribe to aid in building the rising membership of this channel. Your every support counts a great deal. Yet another act of heroic self-sacrifice during the Second World War highlighted the dedicated service of the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion. The 333rd Field Battalion was a segregated African American unit that remarkably bolstered American forces in Western Europe during World War II. However, that sacrifice unfortunately ended in tragedy for 11 American soldiers, murdered in one of the many atrocities committed by German Waffen-SS troops. But in this unique case, these 11 faithful American soldiers were killed with particular savagery because the victims were black. Compounding the tragedy, this atrocity was not officially recognized in the United States until many decades after the war had ended. The 333rd was originally organized as a regiment in 1942 and trained at Camp Gruber, Oklahoma. In 1943, however, it was reorganized as the 333rd Field Artillery Group, consisting of the 333rd and 969th Field Artillery Battalions, both African American combat units with some white officers. Subsequently, 2 other Field Artillery Battalions would be added to this group. The 333rd and 969th Battalions were equipped with the M1 155mm howitzer, a versatile and effective truck-drawn weapon used by the U.S. Army until the Vietnam War, and still in use in some parts of the world today. Arriving in England in February 1944, the 333rd and 969th Battalions shipped over to Normandy in July and provided vital artillery support to American forces through months of hard fighting, including at the Siege of Brest, France. By the time the Allies liberated Paris in August, the 2 battalions were known as some of the most efficient and hard-hitting artillery units in the U.S. Army. In October 1944, the units were assigned to what was assumed to be a quiet front, in support of 8 Corps and the untested 106th Infantry Division in the Ardennes region along the Belgian-German border. The 333rd Battalion was deployed around the small town of Schönberg in an atmosphere tranquil to a point almost approaching garrison conditions, as a later report would admit. Tired from months of constant service, the men took the opportunity to relax, with a recreation center that included a beer hall, bowling alley, and even a badminton court. American GIs stationed in the Belgian-German border town of Bastogne were in a jolly holiday mood. Hollywood star Marlene Dietrich was in town on a USO tour, performing songs for a crowd of fresh-faced new arrivals and war-worn infantry on much-needed R&R. It was 6 months after the D-Day invasion at Normandy, and the Allies had reason to celebrate. D-Day was the name given to the June 6, 1944, invasion of the beaches at Normandy in northern France by troops from the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, and other countries during World War II. They were preparing a musical theater performance when the German offensive known as the Battle of the Bulge began on December 16th. The 106th Division was quickly thrown into disarray. At some outposts, black artillerymen took up rifles and fought alongside the infantry, in one case beating off a German attack and inflicting serious casualties. The German tide was, however, overwhelming, driving through the defending infantry. Recognizing the seriousness of the crisis, batteries of the 333rd and 969th Battalions began pulling back under orders. The 106th Division's artillery commander had desperately requested that the battalions leave batteries behind to offer continuing support, assuring them that the main lines would be held and that they would be in no danger. He was wrong. Master Sergeant Floyd Jones, an African-American artilleryman serving with the 333rd Group, remembered, "We had just been sitting around awaiting orders when news came of the German breakthrough, so get ready for action." Guns of the 333rd Battalion fired furiously in support of the American infantry, allowing some men to escape who might otherwise have been killed or captured. But the gunners' heroism came at a terrible cost as the Germans broke in among the howitzer positions. The Germans captured Schönberg and, continuing to advance, shattered much of the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion, killing or capturing half of its men. 11 artillerymen escaped the German net and walked 10 miles away to the town of Wereth, where they were sheltered by a local civilian. A neighbor who was sympathetic to the Germans betrayed them, however, and the Americans had the misfortune to fall into the hands of the troops of the 1st SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler Panzer Division. Like the men of other Waffen-SS divisions, these Germans were deeply indoctrinated in Nazi ideology and regarded their prisoners as racial inferiors. At 7 p.m. on the evening of December 17th, the SS men drove their captors into the forest. There they savagely tortured their victims with rifle butts and bayonets, before cutting off many of their fingers and running over them with vehicles. Whether before or after the Americans were dead is impossible to say. Then they moved on, leaving the bodies behind. The remnants of the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion fell back, joined with the still intact 969th Field Artillery Battalion, and participated in the defense of Bastogne. For its bravery during this action, the 969th received a Presidential Unit Citation, although the members of the 333rd, who were the ones who actually fought at Bastogne and deserved to share in the honors, the most went unacknowledged. And the 11 men who died at Wereth were sadly ignored. However, the same U.S. Army investigators who uncovered the atrocity at Malmedy also recovered the full details of what happened at Wereth, including the fact that, unlike the white victims at Malmedy, the black men who died there had been brutally tortured. But the investigators made no effort to pursue the matter further, taking no testimonies even though many of the local civilians, including those who had sheltered the artillerymen, were still alive and could have provided evidence. In 1949, a subcommittee of the Senate's Committee on Armed Services conducted a full review of Nazi atrocities during the Battle of the Bulge and completely ignored the Wereth massacre. Members of the family who had sheltered the Wereth 11 marked the site of the massacre with a memorial in 1994, and it was expanded 10 years later. Only in 2017, however, did Congress pass a resolution bestowing official recognition on the victims of the mass killing. Curtis Adams of South Carolina, Mager Bradley of Mississippi, George Davis Jr. of Alabama, Thomas Fort of Mississippi, Robert Greene of Georgia, James Leatherwood of Mississippi, Nathaniel Moss of Texas, George Motton of Texas, William Pritchett of Alabama, James Stewart of West Virginia, and Dew Turner of Arkansas. Called the Greatest American Battle of the War by Winston Churchill, the Battle of the Bulge in the Ardennes region of Belgium was Adolf Hitler's last major offensive in World War II against the Western Front. Hitler's aim was to split the Allies in their drive toward Germany. The German troops' failure to divide Britain, France, and America with the Ardennes offensive paved the way to victory for the Allies. Lasting 6 brutal weeks, from December 16, 1944, to January 25, 1945. The assault, also called the Battle of the Ardennes, took place during frigid weather conditions, with some 30 German divisions attacking battle-fatigued American troops across 85 miles of the densely wooded Ardennes forest. As the Germans drove into the Ardennes, the Allied line took on the appearance of a large bulge, giving rise to the battle's name, Battle of the Bulge. The battle proved to be the costliest ever fought by the U.S. Army, which suffered over 100,000 casualties. The formerly serene wooded region of Ardennes was hacked into chaos by fighting as the Americans dug in against the German advance at Saint-Vith, Elsenborn Ridge, Houffalize, and, later, Bastogne, which was defended by the 101st Airborne Division. Did you ever see land when a tornadoes come through? Did you ever see trees and stuff twisted and broken off? The whole friggin' forest was like that, said U.S. Army Charlie Sanderson in My Father's War, Memories from Our Honored World War II Soldiers. The surprise German attack broke through the front on day one, as stories quickly spread of massacred soldiers and civilians, according to the U.S. Army Center of Military History. For those who had lived through 1940, the picture was all too familiar. Belgian townspeople put away their Allied flags and brought out their swastikas, the center writes. Police in Paris enforced an all-night curfew. British veterans waited nervously to see how the Americans would react to a full-scale German offensive, and British generals quietly acted to safeguard the Meuse River's crossings. Even American civilians, who had thought final victory was near, were sobered by the Nazi onslaught. Hitler's mid-December timing of the attack, one of the bloodiest of the war, was strategic, as freezing rain, thick fog, deep snowdrifts, and record-breaking low temperatures brutalized the American troops. More than 15,000 cold injuries, trench foot, pneumonia, frostbite, were reported that winter. I was from Buffalo. I thought I knew the cold. Baseball Hall of Famer and World War II veteran Warren Spahn said in The Love of Baseball. But I didn't really know cold until the Battle of the Bulge. Another Nazi strategy was to attempt to infiltrate the Allied troops. Veteran Vernon Brantley, a private first class in the 289th Regiment, told the Fort Jackson leader in 2009 that his unit had just arrived in Germany from France when they were told to load up and return to Luxembourg. We got word that the Germans had dropped a lot of paratroopers behind our lines and that they were dressed like American soldiers and spoke English, he said. They were there to create confusion. The Germans also changed road signs and spread misinformation. The Nazis were carefully groomed for their dangerous mission, Life magazine reported in 1945. They spoke excellent English, and their slang had been tuned up by close association with American prisoners of war in German camps. Under the rules of the Hague Convention, these Germans were classifiable as spies and subject to an immediate court-martial by a military tribunal. After brief deliberation, American officers found them guilty and ordered the usual penalty for spies, death by firing squad. To stop infiltrators, the U.S. troops would ask suspected Germans to answer American trivia questions. 3 times I was ordered to prove my identity, General Omar Bradley recalled, according to the Washington Post. The first time by identifying Springfield as the capital of Illinois, the second by locating the guard between the center and the tackle on a line of scrimmage, the third time by naming the then-current spouse of a blonde named Betty Grable. It wasn't until Christmas Day that the weather conditions finally cleared, allowing Allied air forces to strike. It was on that bright, clear, and cold Christmas morning in 1944 that the ground froze solid, Brantley told the leader. The tanks and air forces could finally maneuver and get assistance to all of us who were previously blocked off. It was a welcome sign to see the sun come up. It meant that we were alive for one more day. Claiming victory of the battle on January 25, 1945, and the Allies headed for Berlin. The war ended less than 5 months later, with Germany's May 7th surrender. In all, according to the U.S. Department of Defense, 1 million plus Allied troops, including some 500,000 Americans, fought in the Battle of the Bulge, with approximately 19,000 soldiers killed in action, 47,500 wounded, and 23,000 plus missing. About 100,000 Germans were killed, wounded, or captured. Yet another act of heroic self-sacrifice of Black Americans during World War II, which, sadly, have gone unnoticed, was in the dedicated service of the historic 784th Tank Battalion. So heroic were the deeds of the 784th Tank Battalion that one would mourn the negligence of all the sacrifices endeavored for the sake of a country. The battalion proved to be one of the finest weapons in the American arsenal in 1945. The 784th Tank Battalion's motto was, "It will be done." This African American unit imposed its will on the enemy in combat in 1945. The 784th came late to the fight, but hit the enemy hard when it arrived. Activated in April 1943 as part of the 5th Tank Group, alongside the African American 758th and 761st Tank Battalions, the 784th trained at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. It was a far from pleasant place to work, and one of the recruits appropriately described the local town of Alexandria as a hellhole. In camp, African American soldiers were subject to discrimination and ill treatment by white military policemen and bus drivers. In town, though, they were liable to be bullied, beaten up, or murdered by racist civilians. Fort Hood, Texas, where the men trained intensively in light Stuart and medium Sherman tanks, seemed like paradise by comparison. Leaving Camp Hood in October 1944, the 784th Tank Battalion shipped to Europe, staying over briefly in England before moving to France at Christmas. The unit then moved to the front in the vicinity of Aachen, Germany. At the front, the tankers discovered a changed atmosphere. In camp and in the rear areas among untested units, black soldiers frequently faced racism from their white comrades in uniform. Under fire, though, things often were different. The officers and men of the 104th Infantry Division, to which the 784th initially was attached, welcomed the African American unit and helped prepare the tankers for combat under harsh winter conditions. While combat was sporadic in January 1945, the 784th Tank Battalion was not involved in the Battle of the Bulge. The cold was severe, and many men fell victim to frostbite. Men called their icy metal tanks armored Frigidaires, after the popular brand of refrigerator. In February, the 784th was sent forward to Geilenkirchen, along Germany's Siegfried Line, where it was attached to the 35th Infantry Division. This division would later report that the 784th Tank Battalion was an effective, courageous, and dependable unit, which earned the respect and admiration of the infantrymen who worked together well with the tankers. The pressures of combat would forge that bond. In February 1945, the 784th Tank Battalion furnished support for 35th Division infantry operations along the Roer River. But at the beginning of March, the tankers finally moved out as part of Task Force Bayern, slashing through the German defenses and liberating the Dutch town of Venlo. Suddenly now, after weeks of static warfare, the tankers were moving fast. James Hamilton, driving a Sherman in C Company, remembered that "We were moving so fast that when we came around a turn in town, I slid right through a house. I mean, we tore the whole house down." This accident notwithstanding, Dutch civilians welcomed their black liberators. Some tankers would form relationships with local women. Others, killed in action, would be buried in the Netherlands American Cemetery in Margraten. Past Venlo and moving back into Germany, the tankers faced rapidly increasing enemy opposition. German infantry with Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons knocked out American tanks that outdistanced their infantry support, and mines also took a heavy toll. In the town of Sevelen, German defenders attempted to spring a trap on the tankers by blowing a bridge, forcing the Shermans and their supporting half-tracks to halt, and then taking them under concentrated anti-tank, mortar, and small arms fire. But the Americans fought back fiercely, eventually shattering the German defenses and capturing the town. Sergeant Bill Hughes, who had fired his machine gun until the barrel was too hot to touch, recalled that our morale was very high. The force had blasted its way out of a trap that was designed to seal its doom. The battalion motto, "It will be done," became so clear, and we were proud. Still, German resistance continued to stiffen as the tankers advanced. Enemy anti-tank weapons took a grim toll of the vulnerable Shermans and thin-skinned Stuarts. The 784th Tank Battalion support personnel, who were cut off, were beaten and murdered by their Nazi captors. In combat, though, the bonds between white infantrymen and black tankers grew stronger. In one town, intelligence officer Orval Faubus entered a church where a GI was playing the chapel organ and a Negro soldier was singing with deep feeling an old familiar religious hymn. Other battle-strained GIs listened with weary, strained faces turned toward the singer and the player. On March 26 to 27, the 784th Tank Battalion crossed the Rhine River and drove deep into Germany, the Shermans often carrying squads of 35th Division infantrymen. To this point, the battalion, with an original complement of almost 700 men, had suffered about 200 casualties, including 20 killed in action. And the casualties continued. Infantryman James Graff was riding one Sherman when an enemy Panzerfaust hit the tank and knocked it out. German machine gunners and a 20mm gun then opened fire on the soldiers and tankers as they bailed out. The Panzerfaust had blown the leg off of one of our machine gunners, he remembered. Most of the tank crew had been wounded by the 20mm fire as they abandoned the tank. One man was hit in the elbow. Our medic amputated his arm with a pair of surgical scissors. Participating in the capture of the Ruhr pocket and then driving toward the Elbe River, the men of the 784th had another ugly surprise in store. On one spring morning, Staff Sergeant Franklin Garrido recalled, "The sky was clear, dew was on the ground, and I was lulled into daydreaming about Los Angeles and the California girls. And then I saw this large, tall spiral of black, greasy smoke ascending into the sky. When we rounded the curve, I saw this compound. There was a large, hangar-like building surrounded by a wire fence. On the nearest corner, there, what I thought was laundry. As we got closer, I saw the clothes, to my horror, were human skeletons, alive. Human skeletons were hanging onto the fence, begging us with their eyes to help them." After witnessing this small corner of the Nazi cruelty, meeting with Soviet soldiers at the Elbe River offered a pleasant contrast for the battle-tested men of the 784th Tank Battalion. "What a meet-up with singing and dancing all night long," Sergeant Hughes remembered. "Not to mention that homemade vodka the soldiers were drinking. I tasted it with a quick gulp and choked with a burning throat. Gasping, water only made it worse. It took me almost 20 minutes to recover." The 784th Tank Battalion participated over the next several months in the occupation of Germany, and as the men decompressed, some formed relationships with German women. Their relief was compounded by fear, however, for the battalion was designated to be shipped to Asia for the impending invasion of Japan. Like other Americans, the tankers reacted with relief when they learned of the dropping of the atomic bombs and the end of World War II. In December 1945, they were shipped back to the United States, wondering after all they had experienced what kind of welcome they could expect to receive. What didn't the African Americans do to earn respect and equality amongst the Americans? What didn't they sacrifice? How far didn't they go? They literally gave their lives away to see if anything could come out of it. Following African American exploits during World War II, President Harry, on July 26, 1948, issued Executive Order 9981 in a bid to end racial segregation in the military. Its primary goal was to create equal opportunity and treatment for all American citizens, regardless of their racial background or ethnicity. African Americans have fought in every war the U.S. has ever waged against tyranny, going back to the Revolutionary War. But their service did not result in the blessings of liberty that African Americans have always sought, since their forceful arrival on the American soil in 1619. In closing, our faithfulness to our history as Africans would never allow the rabid events of these memorable pasts out the windows of our minds. Our African fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters, have endured, suffered, and sacrificed way too much for their endeavors to be forgotten. Their histories and the greatness of their works continues to echo for all time, even in the neglect they suffered. This brings us to the end of this video segment, and we hope you enjoyed this one. Look out for more, as there are still more untold exploits of the African American soldiers during World War II. Don't forget to support our efforts by hitting that like button in front of you, share with your families and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening Black narrative, and kindly subscribe to help in building the rising membership of this channel. Your every support counts a great deal. Thank you for watching.